fans. I've seen y'all. Well, I guess I never see you, but that's not the point. Tonight I am bringing a much awaited video, and bringing back an old, fun series of mine, The Legends of Mythology. And of course, you've seen the title, and you know that this video we will be covering Loki, and very soon with a part 2 of his brother, Thor. But we'll approach the whole brother situation at a later time. For now, let's go ahead and get into Loki's video. So this, of course, is the Loki, the true Loki, the Norse mythology version of Loki. This, of course, won't include any MCU stuff or anything like that. Sorry, Tom Hiddleston fans. But this is the true story of Loki. Loki is a god in the Norse mythology. According to some sources, Loki is the son of Forbuti, a Jotun, and Lofi, mentioned as a goddess, and the brother of Helblindi and Blister. Loki is married to Sigyn, and they have a son, Narfi, or Nari. By the Jotun Angerboa, Loki is the father of Hel, the wolf Fenrir, and the world serpent Hrolmenganda. Loki, in the form of a horse, was impregnated by the stallion Svalfrari and gave birth to the 8-legged horse Sleipnir. Loki is referred to as the father of Vali in Prose Edda, though this source also refers to Odin as the father of Vali twice, and Vali is found mentioned as the son of Loki only once. Loki's relation with the gods varies by source. Sometimes he's assisting the gods in performing their heroic deeds, and sometimes behaves maliciously towards them. Loki is a shapeshifter, and in separate incidences, that's a word, in separate incidents, appears in the form of a salmon, a horse, a fly, and possibly an old woman named Puck, Old Norse for thanks. Loki's positive relations with the gods ends with his role in engineering the death of the god Balder, and eventually Vali blinds Loki with the entrails of one of his sons. In both the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, the goddess Skål is responsible for placing a serpent above him while he is bound. The serpent drips venom from above that Sigyn collects into a bowl. However, she must empty the bowl when it is full, and the venom drips in the meantime, which causes Loki to writhe in pain, thereby causing earthquakes. With the onset of Ragnarok, Loki is foretold to slip free from his bonds and to fight against the gods amongst the forces of the Jotnar, at which time he will encounter the god Heimdallr, and the two will slay each other. Loki is referred to in the Poetic Edda, compiled in the 13th century from older traditional sources, the Prose Edda and Heimskringla, written in the 13th century by Snorri Sturluson, the Norwegian Rune poems, in the poetry of the Skalds, and in Scandinavian folklore. Loki may be depicted on the Snaptoon stone, the Kirk goes forth cross. Scholars have debated Loki's origins and role in Norse mythology, which some has described as that of a trickster god. In Poetic Edda, Loki appears, or is at least referenced to, in the poems Voluspa, Lokasenna, Bramskiva, Regensmál, Baldur's Dromare, and Heindunjolo. Oh, sorry, I severely mispronounced that one. In the Voluspa, in stanza 35 of the Poetic Edda, Voluspa, a Volva tells Odin that among many other things, she sees Sigyn sitting very unhappily with her bound husband Loki under a grove of hot springs. And in stanza 51, during the events of Ragnarok, Loki appears free from his bonds and is referred to as the brother of Blistir. A ship journeys from the east with spells peoples are coming over the waves, and Loki steers. They're a monstrous brood with all the Raveneers. The brother of Blist is in company with them. In stanza 54, after consuming Odin and being killed by Odin's son Vior, Fenrir is described as Loki's kinsman. The poem Lokasenna, Old Norse, Loki's flighting, centers around Loki flighting with other gods. Loki puts forth 2 stanzas of insult, while the receiving figure responds with a single stanza, and then another figure chimes in. The poem begins with a prose introduction detailing that Edir, a figure associated with the sea, is hosting a feast in his hall for a number of the gods and even elves. There the gods praise Aegir's serves. There the gods praise Aegir's servers, Vilhelmfing and Eldir. Loki could not bear to hear that, and kills the servant Vilhelmfing. In response, the gods grab their shields, shrieking at Loki, and chase him out of the hall into the woods. The gods then return to the hall and continue drinking. Loki comes out of the woods and meets Eldir outside of the hall. Loki greets Eldir, and the poem begins with a demand that Eldir tell him what the gods were discussing over their ale inside the hall. Eldir responds that they discussed their weapons and their prowess at war, and yet no one there has anything friendly to say about Loki. Loki says that he will go into the feast, and that before the end of the feast he will induce quarreling among the gods and mix their mead with malice. Elder responds that if shouting and fighting you pour out on to the gods, they will wipe it off on you. Loki then enters the hall, and everyone falls silent upon noticing him. Breaking the silence, Loki says that, thirsty, he has come to these halls from a long way to ask the gods for a drink of their famous mead. Calling the gods arrogant, Loki asks why they are unable to speak and demands that they assign him a seat and a place for him at the feast, or to force him to leave. The Skaldic god Bragi is the first to respond to Loki by telling him that Loki will have no seat and will certainly have no place assigned to him by the gods gods at the feast, for the gods know what men they shouldn't fight. Loki does not respond to Bragni directly, not even looking in his direction, but instead directs his attention directly to Odin and states, "Do you remember, Odin, when in bygone days we mixed our blood together? You said you would never drink ale unless it were brought to both of us." Odin then asks his son Vior to set up so that Loki, hereto referred to as the wolf's father, may sit at the feast, and so that he may not speak words of blame to the gods of Aegir's Hall. Vior stands and pours a drink for Loki. Prior to drinking, Loki declaims a toast to the gods, with a specific exception for Bragi. Bragi responds that he will give a horse, sword, and a ring from his possessions, so that he does not repay the gods with hatred. Loki responds that Bragi will always be short of these things, accusing him of being wary of war and shy of shooting. Bragi responds they were outside of Aegir's Hall. Bragi would be if they were outside of Aegir's Hall, Bragi would be holding Loki's head as a reward for his lies. Loki replies that Bragi is brave when seated, calling him a bench ornament, and that Bragi would run away when troubled by an angry, spirited man. The goddess Ayun interrupts, asking Bragi, as a service to his relatives and adopted relatives, not to say words of blame to Loki in Aegir's Hall. Loki tells Ayun to be silent, calling her the most man-crazed of all women, and saying that she has placed her washed bright arms around her brother's slayer. Ayun says that she will not say words of blame in Aegir's Hall, and affirms that she quietened Bragi, who has made talkative by beer, and that she doesn't want the two of them to fight. The goddess Gefjun asks why the two gods must fight, saying that Loki knows that he is joking, and that all living things love him. Loki responds to Gefjun by stating that Gefjun's heart was once seduced by a white boy who gave her a jewel, and who Gefjun laid her thigh over for. Odin says that Loki must be insane to make Gefjun his enemy, as her wisdom about the fates of men may equal Odin's own. Loki says that Odin does a poor job in handing out honor in war to men, and he's often given victory to the faint-hearted. Odin responds that even if it is true, Loki once spent 8 winters beneath the earth as a woman milking cows. During this time, bore children. Odin declares this as perverse. Loki counters that Odin once practiced Theor, a type of sorcery, on the island of Samsey, now Denmark, and appeared as a wizard who traveled among mankind, which Loki condemns as perverse. Frigg, a major deity who is married to Odin, says that what Loki and Odin did in the ancient past should not be spoken in front of others, and that ancient matters should always remain ancient. Loki brings up that Frigg is the daughter of a Fjorn, a personification of the earth, and that she had once taken Odin's brothers, Vile and Vi, into her embrace. Frigg responds that if there was a boy like her, now to see son Balder in the hall, Loki would not be able to escape the wrath of the gods. Loki reminds Frigg that he is responsible for the death of her son Balder. The goddess Freya declares that Loki must be mad, stating that Frigg knows all fate, yet she does not speak it. Loki claims each of the gods and elves there that are present have been Freya's lover. Freya replies that Loki is lying and that he just wants to yelp about wicked things. The gods and goddesses are furious with him and that he will go home thwarted. In response, Loki calls Freya a malicious witch and claims that Freya was once astride her brother Freyr. When all the other laughing gods surprised her, and then it was then Freya farted. This scenario is otherwise unattested. Njord, Freya and Freyr's father, says that it is harmless for a woman to have a lover or someone else beside her husband, and that what is surprising is a preferred god coming here who has borne children. Loki tells Njord to be silent, recalling Njord's status as once having been a hostage from Vanir to the Aesir during the Aesir-Vanir War, that the daughters of Hymir once used Njord as a piss pot. Urinating in his mouth, Njord responds that this was his reward when he was sent as a hostage to the Aesir, and that he fathered a son, Freyr, whom no one hates, and is considered a prince of the Aesir. Loki tells Njord to maintain his moderation, and that he will not keep it secret any longer that Njord has fathered this son with his sister, who remains unnamed, although one would expect him to have been turned out worse. The god Tyr defends Freyr, to which Loki replies that Tyr should be silent, for Tyr cannot deal straight with people, and points out that it was Loki's son, the wolf Fenrir, who tore Tyr's hand off. Tyr responds that while he may have lost a hand, Loki has lost the wolf, and trouble has come for them both. Further, that Fenrir must now wait in shackles until the onset of Ragnarok. Loki tells Tyr to be silent a second time, and states that Tyr's wife had a son by Loki, and that Tyr never received any compensation for this injury, further calling him a wretch. Freyr himself interrupts at this point and says that he sees a wolf lying beneath the river mouth, and that unless Loki is immediately silent, like the wolf, Loki shall be bound until Ragnarok. Loki retorts that Freyr purchased his consort Greyor with gold, having given away his sword, which he will lack come Ragnarok. Big Fear says that if he had had a noble lineage and as honorable seat as Freyr, he would grind down Loki and make all of his limbs lame. Loki refers to Big Fear in the terms of a dog, and says that Big Fear is always found at Freyr's ears, or twittering beneath a grindstone. Big Fear Darius says that he is proud to be here by all the gods and men, and that he is said to be speedy. Loki tells him to be silent, that Big Fear does not know how to appropriate food among men, and that he hides among the straw and dares when men go to battle. The god Heimdallr then says that Loki is drunk and witless and asks Loki why he won't stop speaking. Loki tells Heimdallr to be silent, that he was fated a hateful life, that Heimdallr must always have a muddy back and serve as the watchman of the gods. The goddess Skuld says that while Loki now appears lighthearted and playing with his tail wagging, he will soon be bound with his ice-cold son's guts on a sharp rock by the gods. Loki says that even if this is his fate, that he was first and foremost with the other gods at the killing of Skull's father, Bashad. Skull says that with these events in mind, painful advice will always come from her sanctuaries and plains to Loki. Loki says that Skull was gentler in speech to him when Skull once invited him to her bed, and such events must be mentioned if they are to recall shameful deeds. Sif goes forward and pours Loki a glass of mead into a crystal cup in a prose narrative. Continuing the poem, Sif welcomes Loki and invites him to take a crystal cup filled with ancient mead that says that among the children of Aesir, she is singularly blameless. Loki takes the horn, drinks it, and says that she would be, if it were so, and states that Sif and Loki had been lovers despite her marriage to Thor. Bela says that all of the mountains are now shaking, that she thinks Thor must be on his way home, and when Thor arrives, he will bring peace to those that quarrel here. Loki tells Bela to be silent, that she is much imbued with malice, that no worse woman has ever been among the Aesir's children, calling her a bad serving wench. Thor arrives and tells Loki, "Enough," referring to him as an evil creature, stating that with his hammer Mjolnir, he will silence Loki by hammering his head from his shoulders. Acknowledging that Thor has arrived, Loki asks Thor, why is he raging, and says that Thor will not be so bold to fight against the wolf when he swallows Odin at Ragnarok. Thor again tells Loki to be silent and threatens him with Mjolnir, adding that he will throw Loki up in the roads to the east, and thereafter no one will be able to see him. Loki states that Thor should never brag of his journeys to the east, claiming that there, Thor, cowering in the thumb of a glove, mockingly referring to him as a hero, and adding that such behavior was unlike Thor. Thor responds by telling Loki, again, to be silent, and again threatens him with Mjolnir, and adding that every one of Loki's bones will be broken with the hammer. Loki says he intends to live for a long while, despite Thor's threats, and taunts Thor about an encounter that he once had with Skrymir, who was Loki in disguise. Thor again commands Loki to be silent, and once again threatens Loki with Mjolnir. He says he will send Loki to hell, below the gates of Nagrind. In response to Thor, Loki says that he spoke before the Aesir, and before the sons of the Aesir, that his spirit urged him to say, yet before Thor alone he will leave, as he knows that Thor does strike. Loki ends the poetic verses of Lokasenna with a final stanza. Ale you brewed at year, and you will never again hold a feast. All of your possessions, of which are here inside, may flame play over them, and may your back be burnt. Following this final stanza, a prose section details that after Loki left the hall, he disguised himself as a fish and hid in the waterfall of the Frangoths, where the Aesir caught him. The narrative continues that Loki was bound with the entrails of his son Nari, and his son Narfi changed into a wolf. Skulls fashioned a venomous snake over Loki's face, and from it poison dripped. Sien, his spouse, sat with him, holding a basin beneath the dripping venom. Yet when the basin became full, she had to carry the poison away. During this time, the poison dripped directly into Loki's eyes, causing him to writhe with such violence that all of the earth shook from the force, again creating what we now know to be earthquakes. That is where Loki will remain, at least until Ragnarok, in which he breaks free from his bonds, and he and his children Hel, Fenrir, and Jormungandr will wreak havoc in all of the known realms, and he will meet